Hello, everybody. It's Joshua with the Rose and Yarrow, and thank you for joining us for our week 2 video on our herbal education. Today, we're going to be talking about honeysuckle. Its Latin name is Lonicera japonica, and that just is a description of where it came from, Japan. So it was actually brought from Japan to New York specifically in 1806 to help with the erosion due to the booming infrastructure and construction that was happening. Now, once they tore down all the trees, of course, that's where the erosion happened because there was no longer a root system holding the soil compacted together. So as soon as it would rain, the soil would loosen up and run off. They were also hoping that this would lead for great ground coverage and foraging for the animals, as well as ability for food, just because it was very common and popular amongst hummingbirds and nesting for wild birds. Though the thing they forgot to think about was what happens when it shoots off and goes crazy. The US government is very great about this. They bring in foreign fauna and flora and expect it to do a great job. And it does help out with what it's supposed to do, but then the negative effects of it long term are just horrendous. Many of you have probably driven down the roads here on the East Coast and seen where you can't even see the trees anymore. It's just covered in vines, and that's kudzu root, which we will go over on that one too. That's gagun, that's the kudzu flower. And they're using it for erosion, and though it helps with erosion, what it also does is it climbs up and chokes out all of our trees, and then it grows a thick coverage on the ground and chokes out our ground and shrubbing plants too. So this is kind of what has happened with honeysuckle. And even in many states, they actually have either banned it, illegalized it, or plead for you not to buy, sell, trade, or grow plant this plant in your yard because it is so invasive and they are trying to find ways to get rid of it. So we're going to go over a story. This is a story that comes from China as to how the herb got its name and how we found out its uses. There was two girls, Jin Hua and Yin Hua, twin sisters who loved each other so much they never wanted to be separated. They always wanted to be together, never wanted to have to be married off and forced to move apart. So after their parents had brought in many suitors for them, they had left. The girls had pleaded and begged to their mother and father that they would not be forced to marry someone and be apart, that they did not want to separate. And the father could not say no to his children. He loved them so much that he promised them that he would not force them to be separated, that if they chose to be together and live together, that they could stay together, that they did not have to be separated. So this obviously made the girls very happy. They promised each other that they would never leave each other, that they'd always be there together through sickness, through death, through health, through life. They would just always be together. Though, unfortunately, one of them did get extremely sick. She had a high fever, she was shaking, she was sweating, she had everything that what we would consider to be a viral infection today or an epidemic infection today, which we very much know a lot about at this point with what we have gone through here in America and across the globe. So the parents were very, very worried. So they called in the local physician who came and read her pulses, looked at her tongue, whatever, all symptomology, and came to the conclusion that there was nothing that could be done. Now, this was the top physician around, and the parents had to believe him. There was nothing that could be done. At this point, they only had the Shanghai, which was for cold diseases, wind cold disease, which would show more with more chills and fever, a white tongue, slow pulses, where she had everything opposite: high fever, high thirst, rapid pulses. She was sick. She had epidemic infection. She had or a viral infection of some sort. And so there was nothing that he could do for her. He told the family just to pray and hope that it would pass. And the one sister who had not gotten sick decided she would go and lay with her sister until she got better. Despite the pleas of the sick sister telling her to leave so she couldn't get sick, the one sister reminded her that, we promised each other we'd be together, we would never leave each other's side. Through good and bad, we're together. So she stayed with her. Unfortunately, it was highly infectious, whatever the girl had, and both sisters wound up getting highly sick, and they were bedridden. And for days, their parents prayed and prayed and prayed, and gave them everything they could to get them to get better, but they just would not get better. One day, both girls did pass away, and the parents were so devastated, but they did remember that they didn't want to be separated. So the father, being the loving father he was, promised to keep them together, and so he buried them together, side by side, right together, so that forever they would be together. Now, he was obviously devastated. And he went to go visit the tombstone every day. He cleaned it, he took care of it, and then winter came, and he wasn't able to go out there as much. Then spring came, and he goes out and he's going to go clean his daughter's tombstones when he sees that a random vine had flowered over top of their tombstones. And he had remembered at one point that the daughter said that through their death that they hoped that someone could find a cure, or that a light would be shined upon that sickness, and that they could help cure and help other people later in life. So the father collected this herb. They start using it with people who had similar infections as the daughters, and it showed to be really helping them out. So because of all this, this is why the herb got the name Jin Yin Hua, for the Jin Hua and Yin Hua sisters. So because they're always going to be together, so Jin Yin Hua. It's a flower, so the Hua portion, that's what we're using, the unopened flower. And then that's where its effects for antiviral and anti-epidemic is where we got it from, the studies for it. So some common names, English names, primarily just known as honeysuckle. It's also known as just common honeysuckle, European honeysuckle, or woodbine. There was some other vague names that were out there like elf's ear or elf's fir, but they weren't very common, and it's very much just in folk medicine. So with woodbine, it got that name because it has a woody stem, and bine is just a name that they use to describe an herb that has a flexible stem of a climbing plant. Now, with me growing up, I grew up here in the state of Virginia. We had honeysuckle growing everywhere. To everyone's annoyance, we had it growing everywhere. And me and my brother, we loved going out and collecting it. It had names like honey or sugar straws, honey trumpets, sugar trumpets. And we would go around plucking the flower, biting off the end so we get to the pistils, and you would breathe in the sweet aromas of the honeysuckle. And it would almost like cool you down, which is really funny because in Chinese medicine, it is a cooling herb. But first, Western medical. So in Western medicine, it's known as an antibacterial, antiviral, anti-inflammatory, a refrigerant, diuretic, and diaphoretic. Now, the first three are kind of common sense. Anti meaning against or fights against bacteria, viruses, inflammation. A refrigerant means that it helps to cool the body down. Diuretic means that it promotes urination, and diaphoretic means it promotes sweating. And then in Chinese medicine, we do know it as a cool herb, so refrigerant, and that it helps to release the exterior and helps with heat in the Lin syndrome, we call hot Lin, so urination. So what it's doing is it's actually expectorating that heat from your body through sweat and through urination. So it's kind of cool that it just lines up. Then it has a lot of constituents, but some of the most common ones that were studied were the caffeic acid, chlorogenic acid, decapioquinic acids, hydrogenines, hypericides, and triterpenoid saponins. The caffeic acid was studied in vitro, which is just a Latin fancy word for in glass. So it was just studying glass, which means it's low-level studies, but it showed very great antioxidant activity. The heterogeneine was done in vivo, most likely in rats, and was found to have great anti-inflammatory properties. And then in the 80s, it was studied for its antiviral effects and showed that it had great abilities in fighting against and aiding against or being a antiviral for RSV, HIV, HSV, PRV, and NDV. So it had a lot of great effects for fighting viral infections, and which led to a lot of studies being done with this herb for the protease and inhibitors for HIV-1. They studied against a lot of bacteria and showed proof to be great against a lot of gram-negative bacteria than positive, which we'll get into in a few slides. But it showed great effects against 14 strains, including staph, strep, E. coli, dysentery, typhoid, TB, and malaria. These are really big. Now, some of these we don't see a lot of anymore, especially in America, being TB and malaria, though there have been malaria outbreaks here recently, especially in Florida. So that's a great thing to know that this is just on hand, just in case something happens. We have something that might be potentially helpful against it. Now, the chlorogenic acid was also studied in vitro, but it showed to have great anti-tumor activities, antibacterial, antioxidant, antiviral, anti-inflammatory, and also being hypoglycemic, so helping to lower blood sugar. It's also really effective against gram-negative bacteria, more so than your gram-positives. Now, the difference between gram-negative and gram-positive, other than the name, is that gram-negatives show up as pink or red under the staining, while the gram-positive does show as a different color. And they both also let off different toxins. Now, some of our most common gram-negative bacterial infections that we see are going to be E. coli and our pseudomonas, such as meningitis and pneumonia. So these are some of the ones that have been shown to be most highly effective against. And it's really great that it's so effective against gram-negative rather than gram-positive, because gram-negative have a thinner cellular wall protecting it, which you would think means it would be easier to combat, but it's actually the opposite. Gram-positives are easier for us to treat than gram-negative with Western medicine. The reason for that is that gram-negative bacteria are able to take that thin cellular wall and mutate it. So they will change its hydrophobic properties or mutate its porions, which then makes it trickier for the antibiotics to treat the infection because it's almost like changing itself up. So the antibacterial that was designed for it is no longer effective for it. So this is a great thing that this is a natural remedy for these gram-negative bacteria, or shown to be effective against gram-negative bacteria. And before I continue on, I do want to make sure that at the bottom of each of these slides, you're going to see the FDA warning, and I'll say it out loud too, but these statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration, and this product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. I have to state, even though we have all these studies done by government officials, the NIH, still have to say it. Next one that we saw great studies in were the hypericides. So this was done in vivo, which means in real life or with something with life, and it was done on mice. Now, this does bump it above a in vitro, but it's still not a human study, so it's not exactly the most accurate for us, but it does show us that it has similar effects. So in vivo, it was shown to be hepatoprotective, which just means that it protected the liver from poisons, toxins, anything that was trying to harm the liver. Then in vitro, it was shown to be highly effective against fighting tumors. So again, in vitro is lower level, like class D, A through D would be class D. In vivo is going to be like your higher C levels for your studies. You have the decafeoylquinic acid. Try saying that 5 times fast. It's hard to say it once. But this was done in vitro as well, in glass, but it showed huge effects in inhibiting the HIV-1 virus from mutating or replicating itself. So that's a great thing. So they did a lot of studies with this herb and this acid specifically for the inhibitors and proteases that we use for HIV-1 medication, even used today. The last one we'll talk about are the triterpenoid saponins. So these are pulled from the fresh plant as well as the dried plant. They showed huge anti-inflammatory effects in vivo with mice. This is going to be specifically and greatly with like inflammation of the lungs and the digestive tract, so great for like colitis, diverticulitis, inflammation of your lining, IBS, because it's so cold, it's astringent, it pulls things back together. So that's what it's great for. One of these were just found in 2003, and that was the Lonicera C. And then in 2008, they found 2 more that were derived from the dried flowers, and that was Lonicera D, Lonicera E. So they found C, D, and E both between the years of 2003 to 2008.